Man series, owner of Hall Man Publishing, and Frank Fiore, host of Hotties with Frank. And Frank, you're going to continue to read some excerpts for us. So let's go ahead. And what book are we going into now?
We're going to continue reading from the case of the Red Ghost Camel. And so we left our fellows there, sitting there at a break stop because they were traveling their uh, coach, and at the rest stop, sitting down to eat, and they were discussing the red ghost camel, if it really exists or not. And all of a sudden, they hear something going on in the back with the horses and the mules, obviously dress. And so we'll start reading there from here. Okay, the three men headed for the front door, only to see the horses and mules running towards them in terror. Look out, yelled Smythe as the panicking rush of hooves veered towards the shack. Smythe was able to push Abbott back with his cane into the building just as two mules smashed through the front door in a blind panic. Smythe, Abbott, and the mule drivers stumbled into the room over the tables and chairs and the Mexican cook, who at that moment decided to come out of the kitchen with a pot of coffee. The cook did a somersault over the table. Hot coffee flew into the air and over the two terrified mules that went berserk, tearing out chunks of two of the walls and some of the floorboards. Now, covered in scalding liquid, the mules darted through and out the kitchen just as the old shack started to creak. Abbott and the mule driver, who now was under what was left of the dining room table, heard the threatening noise and looked in horror. The building was coming down upon them. "Get up," Smythe shouted to Albert. "Get up and out, now." He dragged the Englishman across the floor to the kitchen where the wall once stood. The mule driver was close behind. Smythe threw Abbott at the hole in the wall, and he and the mule driver followed just as the old shack collapsed behind them. They pulled themselves off the ground as the mule driver said, looking at what was left of the corral. "What the hell spooked them like that?" Abbott shook his head. "Smythe," he said, "what do you think?" But Smythe wasn't listening. He was looking into the corral. "Where's your partner?" "Don't know. I'll look for him," the mule driver said. Smythe and Abbott followed the driver to the wrecked corral and searched in the darkness. It was Abbott who found him. "Oh my God!" he screamed, turning his head away, pointing behind him. "The horse and mules, they trampled him." "I don't think so," Smythe replied. There, lying on the ground, was the mule driver's partner. His body was ripped open from neck to groin. "The horses and mules couldn't do that," the mule driver said. "What's that?" Abbott said in surprise. He pointed to what looked like a hoof print near the disemboweled driver. Smythe leaned down to inspect it when he said, "He was trampled, but something big, and it wasn't a horse or a mule." He pointed to the very wide print. "That's a cloven hoof." The mule driver's eyes enlarged and his hair almost stood up on end. "It's the Red Ghost." So tune in next week and we'll go into chapter 4. Okay, I don't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, you want to go into chapter 4 a little bit?
Yeah, we could go into chapter 4.
Yeah, go to chapter 4.
Okay. The next morning, finding enough mules to pull at least one of the converted wagons, they pulled into the federal outpost. "Over there," the mule driver said, pointing to a small one-story log building. "There's a saloon where you can get something to eat. Next to it is the old government post exchange." "Is there some place to stay?" asked Abbott. The mule driver shook his head. "No, people just come to the PX from hereabouts to buy what they need and they leave. Not very big, but it supplies the basic needs." He gruffed. "But you can ask at the bar. Someone there might put you up." Taking the mule driver's advice, the two Brits made the short walk to the saloon in search of drink and meal. Except for an Indian and one or two patrons, the saloon was pretty deserted. They walked up to the bar and asked the bartender, "Can we have a couple of beers and a menu?" "A menu?" the bartender snorted. "It's up on the board." He pointed over his shoulder. Smite looked up and written on the chalkboard above the bar were the words "steak and beans." Choices, choices, choices," he said. I guess we'll have the steak and beans." "Good choice," the bartender snorted. "Have a seat at one of those tables. I'll bring you your beer." They sat down at a small, shaky wooden table and waited to be served as the bartender came over with two warm beers. "What do you know about the Red Ghost?" Smythe asked. The saloon keeper knitted his eyebrows together. "What do you want to know?" "Well, we're here to investigate the gruesome murders," Abbott replied. The saloon keeper was quiet for a moment, then said, "Drink your beers. Your food will be up shortly." Then he was gone. Abbott nodded his head towards the Indian at the next table and whispered, "I heard it was illegal to serve Indians liquor." The ragtag Indian, dressed only in buckskin top and long leather loincloth, must have overheard Abbott because he gave the two a nasty sneer. "I'd watch what you say around here," Smite cautioned. "I have a feeling this is not a friendly place." To prove his point, one of the patrons at the bar walked over to the table and, with not so much as an introduction, barked in a thick French accent, "What are you doing here?" Smythe took a sip of his beer and looked up at the tall, gangly man wearing a uniform Smythe had seen before. "Having a bit of breakfast," he replied, then asked, "You're French, and isn't that what you're wearing? Is a French Legion uniform? A French Foreign Legion uniform?" "Oh, at least was. Aren't you a far afield like us?" "I work here for the Baron," he replied in an authoritarian tone. "The Baron?" asked Smythe. "Baron what? What's his title?" "Just the Baron. He owns everything from here to there, and he don't like strangers snooping around his territory." "His territory," Smythe replied. "I thought this was federal land." The ex-legionnaire did not reply and only said, "If I were you, I'd leave here as soon as you can. It's not healthy here." He turned abruptly and walked from the saloon. Two men finished their breakfast, and with a little hope of having someone offer them a bed, Smythe asked the bartender, "Where's the authority in this place?" "Authority?" "Yes, a sheriff, or at least a territorial marshal," Abbott added. "The only authority here is the government agent. You can find him behind the one-time post exchange." "Thank you, my good man," Smythe said. "How much do we owe you for the meal?" "4 bits." Smythe paid him, and they stood up to leave and left to find the government agent. "What do you make of that Frenchman?" Abbott asked. "Don't know. Maybe the agent can fill us in." Smythe scratched his day-old beard. "I wonder." But just as the words left his mouth, an arrow came whizzing by his head and impaled itself on the post next to him. The two drew their guns, but they could see nothing around them. "Definitely not healthy here," Smythe remarked. So,
All right. That's great. Love it. All right. People got to go to frankfiore.com to check out the Smythe books. Appreciate it, Frank. Thanks, Paul.
bye bye.
All right. That was a special simulcast of the Neil Haley Show on Fridays.